We're going to go over some of the materials that you worked with this week, and I'll see if I can help you put some of them together. We're going to be working with a term that I call agent ignorance, and I'll go through the whole explanation in the hopes that if there was something that wasn't quite clear, that it makes sense to you. If you got it right off the bat, it may be a little repetitive for you. First off, we're going to look at the cartoon. This cartoon is representing folks having a reaction to an image of poverty. So on the screen is Charlie Chaplin eating a boot, and he's eating it out of hunger and desperation. And we see there are three different reactions from the three folks at the different levels. Folks with lots of money in the 10,000 slot are having a great big laugh and finding it hilarious and ridiculous. In the middle, we see folks that are representing middle class. They're in the 1,000 seats. They're smiling and thinking that it's funny, but not particularly hilarious. And at the top, we see the folks who are living in poverty in the 100 spot. Their reactions are a lot sadder. They're recognizing that they can kind of understand what that situation is like. So the experience of being able to kind of connect with somebody else and saying, I've been there. It's a little too close to home to actually laugh about it. It doesn't seem like a joke. On this side of it, it seems so ridiculous. Who could possibly eat a shoe? That's just silliness. Clearly it's a joke. It has nothing to do with reality, so you can just have a great big laugh at it. Whereas here, it stops being so funny. And so this is what we're getting at this week, is noticing that where you're coming from really tells the kind of reaction that you're going to get when it comes to oppression. When you don't get it, you really, really won't get it. A couple of examples for you. Back at the cartoon for a second. I've mentioned that I had to migrate out of my country because of homophobia. So this was a very important part of my life history, and it's one that has a lot of pain behind it. When I've told people about it, they have had this reaction, oddly enough. So people hear that I'm from Costa Rica, and they ask, oh my God, from Costa Rica, why would you ever come to Portland where it rains? And I say, because of homophobia. And they really don't get it. I've seen them laugh enough times that it's become a pattern where I can kind of see it coming. It takes them a while, and then it kind of clicks in, and eventually they go, oh, that. When you couldn't imagine that somebody would have to pick up and leave where they're from because of oppression, then it just sounds silly. This term that I made up that I call agent ignorance, I used to call it directional ignorance. I'm not quite sure which term I like better. This notion that the agents are the ones who really, really don't get it. The targets kind of know how the system works. They need to stay alert and on top of it and know the rules that the agents designed, or else they're going to get in trouble. So an analogy or a story to kind of help you think it through is imagine that your boss is having a really bad day at work and is all kinds of mad and angry. That is the day that you kind of want to stay away from them. It's not a good day to be asking for stuff. It's kind of on you to be aware of them, because if you make a mistake that day, the odds are higher that you could get fired. In the other direction, it doesn't go the same way. If you're having a bad day, your boss doesn't really need to know. Like, they might be interested because they're a nice person, but they don't particularly need to know because their job is not at risk. And that's the big difference, is that power differential means that attention will flow towards power. You have to be watching the people in power, because if they want something and you're in their way, you're going to be in big trouble. So you have to be alert to their rules, but not so the other way around. It's a one-directional phenomenon. It doesn't go both ways. It's not a matter of being ignorant of each other's lives because we're so far from each other. No, that would mean that the folks at the bottom wouldn't know either, but they do. For example, if there is a mistake, a crash that happens between a car and a pedestrian, in that interaction, the pedestrian is a lot more likely to get hurt. So it's on them to be alert and snap and be really careful when they're interacting with cars. Whereas in the other direction, the car driver might feel really bad about hurting the pedestrian, but it won't be their lives and their physical body at risk. So when they make a mistake, the consequences aren't as terrible. They're kind of driving around in a box of steel that protects them. So this privilege box keeps them safe. And at the same time that it acts like a shield, that shield kind of covers their face and doesn't really let them see the phenomenon. So they're particularly kept ignorant about how the system works. So remember that about agent ignorance, that it's one directional but not the other. In thinking about this, I always have the reaction of folks when they start to learn about an oppression that they benefit from. So when white folks start to learn about racism, or when men start to learn about sexism, or when able-bodied people start to learn about ableism, the reaction is pretty typical, and they'll say, "Oh my God, I never knew. I never knew. And it's so shocking to know that, and how did I never know?" And it can be really overwhelming to realize that there were all these things that you actively didn't know. And there's a lot of shame and guilt around that. And usually I tell folks, I know that you didn't know. You weren't supposed to know. It wasn't that you weren't necessarily just not paying attention. It wasn't that you're a bad person. It's that you were actively trained to never know this system. And there's a few reasons why. I'll get into them with you. For a system of oppression, of inequity to work, it has to be that the folks on top don't really know that it's happening. So finding out that they're getting ahead through cheating, that somebody's been giving them an advantage that didn't actually earn, would feel really, really crappy for them. So they'd get this feeling of guilt and shame, and it would be a huge ego blow, right? Because they like to think that they got there by themselves. So if we think of privilege like being born on third base and thinking that you hit a triple, finding out that you've been cheating is having to give up that notion that you hit that triple. It's a huge ego blow that doesn't feel very good. So if you catch a glimpse of a system that's kind of acting in your favor, you'll feel guilty, you'll feel crappy, and it'll be an ego blow. So it's kind of in your interest to not find out that it's happening. If you did, you might have to do something about it. You might have to take some action to end it, or else have to deal with your conscience weighing on you. So it's in your best interest to not know that it's happening. And if you ever do find out, it's in your best interest to kind of forget about it. To be so overwhelmed to say, oh, I can't change any of this, it's too much. And you just kind of forget, and it's gone. Like McIntosh in the article talking about how she'd forget things over and over until she wrote them down. Something else that's happening to make sure that the folks in power don't know what life is like for folks with less power is that their lives are not represented in media. So when it comes to racism, really, we're not seeing black lives on TV. We're not seeing them in the movies. We are not seeing people of color being represented in news, in Disney. We just don't see them anywhere. So we don't see their lives represented. Likewise for women, when we see politicians in the news, when we see people in power, it's not women. We don't see women's lives represented pretty much anywhere and or accurately. And so literally the folks in power have less chances to learn about us. They're just not exposed to our lives. And that's another thing that keeps them not thinking about it. One thing to think about with this concept of agent ignorance or directional ignorance is remember that it's one directional, not both ways. The folks with less power have to be alert and on top of it and know the entire system in order to stay safe and survive. So for example, when it comes to sexual assault, there's this game that is called mixed signals. And so it is an excuse that is used to cover up assaults and say, well, you know, she was giving mixed signals. And so women have to be trained on what this mixed signals thing is so that they can never be accused of it, as if that was really what was happening in a case of assault. But it's important to notice that men don't particularly need to know this dynamic because their lives aren't at risk, whereas women do need to know it. In thinking about some of the impact of this ignorance is knowing that when you're in power, you cannot know. It's not a matter of you not wanting to know. It's not that you're a mean person. It's that you really cannot know what life is like for the folks with less power. Because of this, even if you were the most progressive, kind, interested person who actively tried to seek out information and try to educate yourself, we know that you will never actually get the experience. This means that you should never be making decisions for the folks with less power because you're missing a very important piece of information. This is where the phrase, nothing about us without us, comes up. This is a phrase that was coined in the disability rights movement. And they're saying nothing that is decided about us should happen when we are not there, and when we are not there to make the decision. It's not just a matter of being invited into the room and being heard for a few minutes. It's like we need to be the ones who make the decisions that affect us. When we have a situation where we have 9 white old men, signing a piece of paper that affects reproductive rights of women, we say that's a problem because those men don't have the information that they need to make the decisions that will affect millions of people, of women's lives specifically. They really shouldn't be the ones signing the paper. It should be the experts, which would be the women. Another thing to think about is that if you can kind of accept this notion of ignorance, the fact that you do not know, you cannot know, is having the humility of saying, I will never get it. That may make you just a little bit more willing to give the benefit of the doubt when somebody else is speaking about an oppression that you benefit from. So, for example, I benefit from class privilege. While I may have a reaction in which I go, they're probably overreacting, that really wasn't that big of a deal. When somebody else is talking to me about class oppression, since I know that I cannot know, I may be a little bit more willing to take a step back and say, okay, let me see if I can learn about this. Even though I don't think it's right, I'll make that leap of faith. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and see if I can kind of follow along with you. Likewise, I'm hoping that this term can help you think about developing empathy and saying, since I understand racism, maybe I can understand homophobia just a little bit. Or since I understand ableism, maybe I can understand transphobia just a little bit. That ability to connect across difference is really important. That ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoe, that empathy is really important, especially when you're coming from a place of ignorance. You're going to need to take some extra steps to make sure that you get there. I have a story. There was one time I went out on a first date with a guy who was 6'6" and 400 pounds. Very, very, very large man. And as we were talking, I kind of tested him and I said, listen, so how do you deal with your very large body when you're out in public and women? And he was right on it. He said, I'm very careful. I never get on an elevator when there's only one woman in there. I will wait and take another elevator because I want to make sure that I am not frightening her. He also said, when I'm walking down the street at night and there's only a woman walking ahead of me, I will always stop and let her get ahead of me by like 2 or 3 blocks. And then I'll start walking because I know that with my size, my presence will be very scary for her. That takes a special level of training, a special willingness to educate yourself on the phenomenon of sexism when you benefit from it, to be ready and eager and willing and looking for ways to make sure to counteract it. We have one more thing that I'd like you to think about when it comes to this notion of agent ignorance. The phone cut me off. I ran out of space. Hopefully this will go better. One more thing that we need to talk about is in thinking about how to develop empathy and how to kind of be able to switch back and forth between your perspective and somebody else's. We want to kind of think of the perspective of these folks up here, the folks who are tired of the oppression, who are at their wits' end, who don't have a lot of energy left, who are very rightfully angry. When it comes to their oppression, they're going to be really impatient with very good reason. They don't have years to wait. Their life is literally on the line. So they have a sense of urgency that is true and valid and very important. On the other side, when you're coming from the place of privilege, as you think of pretty much how much you don't know and how you'd like to know and you'd like to not make mistakes, you may really wish that the folks with less power than you could be a little patient as you're learning and as you're trying to make sense of it. You may have all the best intentions and keep messing up and say, wait for me just a second, I'm trying to get there and I'm not quite there yet. So we kind of have a difficulty putting both folks in one space. These folks are tired and impatient and angry with good reason to be. And these folks are just struggling to catch up in the best case scenario. And so getting them both together means that we have kind of a conflict of interest when we're sharing space. How to work through that is really tricky, and there's no good answer to it. But one of the things I'm hoping for is that you can imagine yourself on both sides, that you can remember what it feels like to be on either side of this equation, so that you can hopefully be able to connect with each other just a little bit better. And remember, when you were that ignorant, when you were the one making that terrible of a mistake, that time you said that one thing, that horrible joke that you wish you could take back. And at the same time, remember how very tired you are of your oppressors, how you wish you could teach them, how you wish you could get them to understand what your life is like. So being able to hold space for both sides is a complexity that's really important when it comes to social justice work. Keep that in mind as you're doing your work, and I'll see you next time.